Imagine this. You wake up in a room that looks exactly like your own same bed. Same light leaking through the curtains. Same worn-out shoes by the door. But something is wrong. You can't feel your body. You move your hands, but they don't move. You call out, but no sound escapes. You realize you're not waking up. You're trapped inside yourself. You are fully conscious, fully aware, but locked in a mind that no longer knows how to scream. Now imagine this isn't a dream. Imagine it's your actual life, but instead of physical paralysis, it's emotional, existential. A silence so loud that even your own thoughts echo back as strangers. You go through the motion seat, speak, scroll, reply, but behind every action is a dead weight. The kind that pulls you further down the more you try to resist. You sit at the edge of your bed, not because you're preparing to do something, but because you don't know what else to do. There are no fireworks of emotion, no dramatic tears, just nothing. Or maybe worse than nothing. The sense that everything has already happened, and none of it meant anything. You check your phone again, not for messages, but for proof that something exists outside your mind. You glance in the mirror not to fix your appearance, but to see if your reflection still looks like someone who matters. And for the briefest of moments you wonder, what if this is it? What if this feeling doesn't pass? What do you call a life where time keeps moving, but you don't? They call it depression. Others call it burnout, or disillusionment, or just a phase. But what if those are just labels to make the abyss feel less terrifying? What if it's not just a disorder, but a message? A warning? Or worse, a mirror? You've been taught your whole life that progress is forward motion, that healing is upward, that success is external. You're told to stay positive, to be grateful, to look on the bright side. But what if there is no bright side? What if the very act of constantly chasing the light is what led you into the darkness? What if rock bottom isn't a place you fall to, but the foundation you were always standing on, and only now are forced to see? These are not the questions you ask out loud. They don't make good dinner conversation. They're too raw, too disruptive, too honest. They threaten the structure we've been conditioned to believe in, that life is linear, that happiness is achievable, that meaning is a default setting. But now you're here, and here is not where you thought you'd end up. So ask yourself, why does the silence feel heavier than the noise? Why do the things you once loved now feel like empty rituals? Why do people's voices sound like echoes through glass? Why does being alone feel safer than being understood? There is a haunting paradox in the lowest points of your life, that nothing is happening, yet everything inside you is screaming, that you are exhausted, but have done nothing, that you are surrounded, but feel fundamentally unreachable, that you crave meaning, but are terrified of what it might demand from you. You want to be seen, but also want to disappear. You want answers, but know deep down that easy ones would only insult your pain. And so you sit in the silence, in the suffocating stillness, waiting for something to change, knowing it won't unless something inside you does. But what? What could possibly change when the world feels like it's already moved on? When every motivational quote feels like a slap to your numbness? When every suggestion, exercise, meditation, journaling feels like a cruel joke written by people who've never stared down the barrel of nothingness? Here's the bitter truth. The people who tell you it gets better don't know what it cost you to get here. And the ones who say, just hang on, have no idea what it feels like to be dangling from a thread made of memory and make believe. So where do you go when you can't go back, and forward no longer exists? That is the question this moment demands. Not how to escape the darkness, but what the darkness wants from you. What it reveals. What it unmasks. You see, this isn't about motivation. This isn't about being okay. This is about confronting something most people never do. The terrifying still point where life and meaning part ways, and you are left alone, truly alone with yourself. But perhaps, just perhaps, in that void is something waiting, not to save you, but to show you something you were never allowed to see, something that changes everything. And to understand what that is, we need to look deeper, much deeper, into the hidden architecture of this emptiness, into the root of why we fall. There is a lie so well disguised, so intimately stitched into your every belief, that you've come to mistake it for the truth. The lie is this: if you feel lost, if you feel empty, if you feel like you are drowning beneath the weight of your own existence, it must be your fault. But what if it isn't? What if the problem isn't that you're broken, but that the world you were told to survive in is? Let's rewind. You were not born confused. As a child, you laughed without permission. You cried without shame. You asked impossible questions and believed impossible things. There was no performance-only presence. But over time, something shifted. You learned that approval was conditional, that silence was rewarded more than truth, that pleasing others meant safety, and being yourself meant risk. You weren't told this directly. No one sat you down and explained the terms of this unspoken contract, but you learned it through repetition, through consequence. Be quiet, don't make a scene. Good boy, good girl. That's not how we behave. So you adapted, not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. Like any creature in a hostile environment, you trimmed the parts of yourself that seemed too wild. You dressed your truth in language that wouldn't offend. You became manageable, and then one day, you forgot you were pretending. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the self-deception that arises when we reject our true freedom and authenticity in favor of socially constructed roles. We trade our essence for acceptance. We become what is expected instead of what is real. But here's the paradox. The more you succeed at playing the part, the more invisible your suffering becomes, because you're doing everything right. You're checking the boxes, earning the degrees, showing up on time, smiling when it hurts. So why does it still feel like something inside you is dying? Carl Jung believed the psyche has a shadow, a hidden, suppressed part of ourselves where we exile everything we fear or reject. Not just rage or desire, but also potential, power, truth. And the more we suppress the shadow, the more we fracture. We become shells, externally polished, internally hollow. You might recognize this feeling, waking up and not knowing why, not knowing who. A quiet panic, not loud enough to scream, but constant enough to ache, like your soul is pressing against the inside of your skin, begging for air. This isn't depression in the clinical sense. This is existential claustrophobia, the awareness that you are trapped in a life you didn't consciously choose, and the terrifying realization that you're the one who built the cage. But how could you have known when everything around you rewards the mask? Nietzsche warned that when man loses a sense of divine purpose, when the external structures that gave life meaning collapse, he is left alone with himself, and the weight of that freedom can become unbearable. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow, wrote Viktor Frankl. But what if your why was never yours to begin with? What if you inherited it from parents, teachers, screens, and systems that never asked who you really were? This is the hidden problem. Not sadness, not failure, but meaninglessness. The slow erosion of a life built around pleasing others. The quiet despair of success that feels like a lie. And here's what no one tells you. This is not a flaw. This is a threshold, a portal, the first glimpse beyond the veil. The moment where you realize the old ways of coping, achievement, validation, distraction don't work anymore. Not because you failed at life, but because you are waking up from it. And waking up is violent. It tears, it burns, it isolates. Because when you stop playing the role, you threaten the system. You confuse people. You become unpredictable. But that is the beginning of truth. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that human suffering was not an error to be corrected, but a fundamental condition of existence. Yet he also saw, in that suffering, a form of wisdom breaking open that allows us to see clearly for the first time. What if the pain you feel now is not the end but the beginning of that seeing? Not the signal of defeat, but the slow resurrection of a forgotten self? You were not meant to be a brand, or a resume, or a mask. You were meant to be something raw, something wild, something whole. But before you can return to that, you must first recognize the lie. And now you have. You've felt it in your bones. You've seen it behind your eyes. That quiet, terrifying question. What if the life I've built is not the life I want? That is not a crisis. That is a calling. And the next step, you'll have to go deeper. Into the consequences. Into the unseen. Into everything this world hoped you'd never notice. You didn't notice it at first. It crept in like fog, quiet, invisible, almost gentle. The slow disconnection, the dulled enthusiasm, the gradual dimming of things that once set your soul on fire. You didn't fall off a cliff, you eroded. You didn't scream, you silenced. One choice at a time, and that's the problem. The most dangerous prisons are the ones without bars, the ones that don't look like suffering, the ones disguised as normal life. You see, most people don't shatter all at once. They leak. They leak dreams they never pursued, words they never said, feelings they never expressed, slowly, silently, until one day, they look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. That's how it happens. Not because they're weak, but because they were taught to survive by shrinking, to fit in, to perform, to be efficient rather than expressive, agreeable rather than authentic. And this conditioning wasn't some grand conspiracy, it was inherited, passed down through generations of people who did what they had to do to feel safe. But safe does not mean alive. And this is where the trap begins. Because the same world that teaches you to perform also teaches you to doubt your pain. It says you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. It pathologizes your sadness, your questions, your anger as if you are the malfunction. But maybe what you're feeling isn't a personal flaw. Maybe it's the accurate emotional response to a world that's lost its depth. Because we live in a culture that mistakes stimulation for connection. That confuses busyness with purpose. That rewards appearances over presence. And what's worse, it conditions your nervous system to accept that state as normal. So now, even when everything is fine, you feel numb, you feel tired, you feel nothing, and you wonder why. Let's pull back the curtain. Psychologically, your brain runs on patterns. It craves safety through familiarity. And in a hyper-connected, hyper-stimulated society, the familiar becomes the constant noise, the likes, the scrolling, the endless information that keeps you occupied, but never centered. Your nervous system is stuck in a state of low-level survival. You're not in danger, but you're not at peace either. You're hovering, always slightly tense, always slightly guarded. That's why stillness feels unbearable. Why silence feels threatening. Why being alone with yourself feels like stepping into the void. But it's not the void that's scary. It's what the void reveals. Without distraction, you're forced to confront the truth. You've been living someone else's life, following someone else's blueprint, carrying dreams that were never yours to begin with. And here's the bitter irony. You've been working so hard to build a future, all while slowly abandoning the present moment where your real life actually exists. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. The brain adapts to its environment. If you train it to seek dopamine from notifications, it forgets how to find joy in simplicity. If you train it to fear failure above all else, it stops taking creative risks. If you train it to equate worth with productivity, it collapses when rest arrives. And that collapse isn't laziness, it's grief. Grief for the self you silenced, for the years you lost, for the aliveness you postponed in exchange for approval. But it doesn't stop there. The consequences of living this way extend far beyond your own psyche. They ripple into your relationships. You start to attract people who reflect the mask you wear, not the truth you hide. And so your loneliness deepens not because you're alone, but because you're unseen. Even your capacity for love becomes filtered, reduced to performance, obligation, compromise. Real intimacy becomes terrifying. Vulnerability feels unsafe. You become armored in your own skin, even in the arms of another. And society calls this adulthood. But what if adulthood wasn't meant to be the burial ground of wonder? What if we were never supposed to outgrow awe, or silence the parts of us that still believe in magic? What if the very things you think make you weak, your longing, your doubt, your despair, actually signs of an untouched truth beneath the surface? That truth isn't convenient. It will cost you. It will ruin your reputation with people who only loved your mask. It will isolate you from the comfortable consensus, but it will also set you free. Because the greatest threat to any system of control is an individual who remembers who they are. And now you're remembering. You're feeling the symptoms not of failure, but of awakening. The burnout, the anxiety, the emptiness. They're not signs that you're doing life wrong. They're signals that your soul is rejecting the script. But awakening is only the beginning. Now comes the rebellion. The moment where you decide to burn the costume, to walk into the unknown, to reclaim the parts of you that never fit in because they were never supposed to. Are you ready? Because after this, there's no going back. Now the moment has arrived. The curtain's been pulled back, the performance exposed, the applause silenced, and all that's left is the breath between who you were and who you could become. This is the place most people turn back. They patch the cracks, paint over the discomfort, run back to the noise. Because the unknown is a dark mirror. It reflects back not who you've been told you are, but what you truly are when no one is watching. But you're still here, and that means you're ready. Not for comfort, not for safety, but for something real. So let's begin with something dangerous. You were never meant to fit in. Everything in you that has been called too much, too sensitive, too intense, those are not glitches in your design. They are clues. They are messages from the self you buried to survive. The rebellion begins when you stop negotiating with that voice. Because that voice, that's not your weakness. That's your compass. It doesn't speak in polite affirmations. It screams. It aches. It breaks you open in inconvenient moments. And for years, you've been taught to silence it, to suppress the discomfort, to medicate the unrest, to be resilient, mature, high-functioning. But what if the breakdown is sacred? What if the collapse isn't a malfunction but an initiation? Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned that individuation, the process of becoming your whole self, is not a gentle process. It is violent, dismantling. It requires the death of the ego's illusion, the end of borrowed identities. And death always feels like failure until you understand what's being born in its place. So how do you begin? Not by fixing yourself, but by undoing what was never you. Start here. 1. Burn the script. Whatever life you were handed by parents, teachers, media, culture, question it. Every value, every should, every inherited dream. Hold it in your hands and ask, did I choose this? Or did I just agree to it out of fear? You don't need to burn your life to the ground. But you do need to stop calling it yours if it was built entirely from borrowed expectations. 2. Reclaim your solitude. Stop fearing your own company. Turn off the noise. Sit in a room without distractions and just be. You'll want to escape. You'll feel restless. But stay. On the other side of that stillness is the truth you've been avoiding. Every transformation begins in silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that allows what's buried to surface. 3. Redefine your value. You are not your productivity. You are not your resume. You are not the number in your bank account or the shape of your body. You are what remains when everything collapses. You are the witness behind the thoughts, the pulse behind the performance. Your worth is not earned, it's inherent. And the moment you stop trying to prove it, the healing begins. 4. Embrace sacred rebellion. This doesn't mean chaos for the sake of chaos. It means becoming ungovernable by the forces that once controlled you. Fear, guilt, approval. It means saying no to what drains you, even if it makes others uncomfortable. It means walking away from roles that cage your spirit even if you disappoint people who once loved your mask. It means choosing truth over belonging. 5. Surround yourself with mirrors, not judges. Most people are terrified of your authenticity. Not because they hate you, but because your courage reminds them of their own chains. They'll call you arrogant, ungrateful, unrealistic. Ignore them. Find people who don't flinch when you speak your truth. People who don't just tolerate your fire but feed it. People who remind you, not of who you've been, but of who you're becoming. 6. Remember your body. Your body has kept the score. It holds every moment you bit your tongue, every time you betrayed yourself to be accepted. It deserves your love, your presence, your breath. Move, walk, dance, scream, shake. Let the trauma exit through the same vessel it entered. Healing isn't just intellectual, it's somatic. You can't think your way free, you must feel your way through. 7. Make meaning, not noise. We live in an era obsessed with visibility. But visibility without authenticity is just another mask. Create art that tells the truth. Write words that bleed. Speak not to impress but to awaken. Let your life become a message, not of perfection, but of presence. This is the rebellion, a return, not to some better version of yourself, but to the self that existed before you were told to improve. And yes, it will cost you. You may lose relationships, opportunities, certainty, but what you gain is worth everything. Your self-respect, your aliveness, your voice. There is no map for this path, no 5-step plan, only a question. Will you honor the voice inside you, even if the world never applauds it? If the answer is yes, then welcome. You're no longer just surviving. You're remembering, and soon you'll realize this entire journey wasn't a fall from grace. It was the long, necessary collapse before the rise. And now, with your eyes open and your mask shattered, you are finally ready. Ready for the ultimate truth. Imagine this. You are sitting in the ruins of everything you thought would save you. The titles, the roles, the validation, the promises you made to yourself when you were younger, and still believed the world rewarded those who followed the script. Now, the silence is deafening. There's no applause, no advice, just the echo of your own heartbeat, steady, ancient, alive. And for the first time, there is no one left to perform for. That's when it happens, not with fireworks, not with divine revelation, but with a slow, almost imperceptible exhale, the kind you didn't know your lungs had been holding in for years. A terrifying, beautiful truth rises inside you like a tidal wave. You are not here to be fixed. You never were. You were never broken, never defective, never missing some vital piece. What broke was not you, but the world you were told to conform to. The one that rewarded your obedience and punished your honesty. That measured your worth by your output. That made you shrink to fit a story too small for your soul. What if the ache you've carried all this time wasn't a problem, but a signal? What if the emptiness wasn't a void to be filled, but a space finally cleared for truth? You were taught to survive, and you did. You adapted. You compromised. You wore the mask so convincingly that even you began to forget there was a face beneath it. But here's the revelation that changes everything. You are the author of your becoming, not your trauma, not your critics, not your past, you. And that means that any moment you can choose to begin again, to stop being a mirror for other people's expectations, and start becoming a canvas for your own resurrection. Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Your chaos is not your curse, it's your crucible. It's the storm that tears down the hollow structures of your old life to make room for something real, something holy. Most people try to outrun that chaos. They numb it, rationalize it, drown it in endless doing. But the brave, the rare few, they listen to it. Because chaos speaks in the language of transformation. And when you stop resisting it, when you allow yourself to feel the weight of everything you were never allowed to grieve, a doorway opens. On the other side of that doorway is something no one can give you, and no one can take away. Radical self-possession. You stop waiting to be rescued. You stop begging the world to understand you. You stop shrinking for the comfort of others. And you rise, not as a perfected version of yourself, not as someone who's finally earned their worth, but as someone who finally remembers, I was always enough before the world taught me to doubt it. Your scars become sacred. Your voice becomes a weapon of truth. Your presence becomes revolutionary, because it is rooted in something no system, no critic, no trauma can touch. Your essence. And once you've tasted life on those terms, unapologetic, unfiltered, unscripted, you can't go back. You won't. Even if it means standing alone. Even if it means being misunderstood. Because nothing hurts more than betraying yourself to belong. You don't need a 10-year plan. You don't need to be healed before you begin. You just need one thing, a decision to trust the fire inside you more than the noise around you. A decision to walk your path, even when it's unpaved, even when it's unpopular, even when it terrifies you. A decision to look at your reflection not through the eyes of fear or shame, but through the eyes of something ancient and undefeated that lives inside you still. Call it soul, call it spirit, call it the truth beneath every false identity you've ever worn. It's been waiting for you to stop searching for home in others, waiting for you to stop seeking peace and perfection, waiting for you to finally return to yourself not as a project to fix, but as a mystery to live. This is not the ending. This is the door. And on the other side is not certainty, not clarity, but something far more powerful, freedom. So take the step. Let it all fall away. The rules, the lies, the masks. And in that naked, trembling silence, listen, you'll hear it, the sound of your soul, whispering a truth you knew before you were taught to forget. You are the miracle, not the improved version, not the polished version. You're right here, right now, as you are, as you've always been beneath the noise, not broken, becoming.